Thank you very much for having me here at this stunning venue, Amos Rex. I was at the museum theme days in 2014, and I was really delighted to be invited back to join you again in 2018, because I feel that this community of Finnish museum people really want to move forward together, and I support that with all my heart. I'm going to talk to you today about the progress we're making as a sector in terms of becoming better, more accurate and articulate about the social impact that we're having when we're digitizing our museums. We're digitizing our collections, our data, but we're also standing on the experiences of digitization of society, which entails a new openness, a new way of sharing information across borders, across topics, across sectors and capacities, professional capacities. So when I'm saying digitizing, I'm not just talking about putting a museum collection online, but actually what that leads to in terms of working much more openly with the world around us. So I was introduced as a curator and senior advisor of digital museum practice. And when I started as a freshly educated art historian 11 years ago, this title didn't exist at all. This says something about the development that the museum sector and the cultural heritage sector is going through these years. So I actually don't have any training in digital at all. But being an art historian, it has always been close to my heart to open up art history and what art can mean to people, to as many people as possible. And encountering digitization of cultural heritage was my sort of aha moment as an early professional. That here we have some amazing potentials to actually unfold the vision innate in the museum sector since the Age of Enlightenment, of being a foundation for dialogue, for learning, for sharing knowledge, and for building democracy and engagement in our societies. Digitization really helps us work with that and achieve that. I'm also deeply involved in Europeana, which I know will be familiar to many of you, but just in case some of you are not familiar with Europeana, it is a platform for Europe's digitized cultural heritage, featuring in the online collection more than 50 million objects from 3,700 European cultural heritage institutions. Furthermore, it's a network of people like you and me, working in cultural heritage all over Europe and coming together to discuss and develop shared standards and principles for how to work with cultural heritage in the digital age. And for 2 years now, I've been chairing the Europeana network, working with people all over Europe to make progress in this field. So what my work is really focused on is developing ways to create reuse of the digitized cultural heritage that we have been for years putting online and putting out there for people to enjoy. And furthermore, I'm very interested, as I know many of you must be, in what does it matter that we digitize and put our knowledge, our collections, our artworks online. What difference does it make in people's lives? How does it change people's opportunities, and ultimately the world we live in. I work at the National Gallery of Denmark in Copenhagen. Come and visit us sometime. We have a collection of Western art from the Middle Ages to the present day. Approximately 400,000 visitors a year. The collection spans these 700 years and houses 260,000 artworks. It's the biggest collection of art in Denmark. 2/3 of this collection is in the public domain, meaning that the artworks are so old that the copyright has expired, if it ever was there in the artworks to begin with. And we are working, of course, on digitizing this vast collection, approximately 30% into that work. Since 2008-09, when we first really started to formulate a digital strategy, we set ourselves the task that more than just digitizing the collection and putting it online and creating access, we wanted to take the next step and be a catalyst for users' creativity using this online collection, this digitized asset, as a toolbox for people to use. And right now we're in the middle of the multi-annual program SMK Open, supported by the Danish Nordea Foundation. Until 2020, we will be opening up the digitized collections of SMK for all to use and enjoy. This means that already you can access and for free download many of the highlights in our collection, because it's in the public domain, and the reproductions of the artworks in the public domain, we have decided to also hand over to the public domain. So free of any restrictions. For this purpose, we use the Creative Commons public domain dedication. In Danish copyright law, not only do artworks have a copyright protection spanning 70 years after the artist passes away, also a photograph, even a snapshot, is protected 50 years after the picture was taken. This varies a little bit from country to country, but it means that we had to use a public domain dedication to give away the rights to the photographs of the artworks in the public domain. The public domain means that you don't have to ask permission to use these resources. You have the right to use them. They belong to you. So you can use them for learning, play, creativity, research, innovation, even commercial purposes. And we really encourage you to do that. SMK Open is a project that takes this public domain collection as its starting point. This is the resource that we work from. Around that resource of many, many digitized artworks, we have data, we have information about the artists, the artworks, the provenance, and so on. We have research that has been published in analog form. We have video, audio, websites, and so on. And the project of SMK Open is actually to tie all of that data together in digital form, in seamless, easy-to-access ways, so that eventually we can make all of these connected assets readily available for everyone who has an internet connection. This happens on our website. It happens via APIs, so that not only humans can read and enjoy and access this, but also machines can access and sift through the data and build new stuff. We're also very much present on external platforms like Wikipedia. Europeana, and so forth. And in the final row over here, all of this data that is freely available is enabling and empowering third parties to take our data and run with it and make new things, build new things with it. So we're seeing a lot of examples of that. And this is where the whole impact thing comes in, because we have control over this. We know that, okay, we're doing this and we're seeing some good responses to it. But the next step of actually knowing how that influences people's abilities, enjoyment of art, feeling connected with art, their general sense of fulfillment and well-being in life, how this spurs economy and development in society. We want to be better at tracking that and communicating that to stakeholders such as funders, politicians, etc. So, as you can see, SMK Open is all about democratizing this collection, which really belongs to everyone, but the physical objects are of course in the museum, and we can't let anyone touch those, because then they'll break and we can't pass them on to future generations. But the digital copies you can touch, you can clip, you can remix, you can make your own stuff out of that without the originals breaking. Our current strategy is called SMK for All. And as you can see, I've put some links in my slides, and my slides are up on SlideShare. I tweeted them out, so you can look them up at Teemapäivät on Twitter. And you can find all of this information and go look further. So in our strategy, we actually talk about this societal impact that we want to have, hope to have. Being the National Gallery and main art museum in Denmark, SMK carries an important responsibility towards the entire country and beyond. The vast collection of 700 years of art is common national property, and ideally, everyone who lives in Denmark share a sense of ownership to this unique cultural heritage. Our work is based on the conviction that the artworks in our rich collection has a role to play in the society that surrounds us, through its ability to deepen our understanding of the world, its peoples and histories. We believe that the development museums have undergone in the past decades holds the key to engage far more and more different people than we reach today. So that's what we aim to achieve. But SMK for All is of course an aspiration, and there's far to go. In recent surveys carried out in Denmark, more than half of the Danes think we should spend less or considerably less money on cultural institutions. So apparently they don't think that SMK is for all, and this of course is just a symptom of the entire sector. And we're actually seeing that the cultural sector is under pressure everywhere in Europe and beyond. In recent years, we've seen some devastating cuts of the cultural sectors in England, Holland, Italy, and also in Denmark. Since 2016, the entire public cultural sector has been cut with 2% consecutively every year, so it's just building up. And the state funding for museums like the National Gallery is just slowly decreasing. So we don't have this support from the public, the broad public, who really sees that museums are giving them something they really care for. They think it's okay to cut. In a recent book by 2 Danish authors. There's a link there. It's, of course, links to Danish sites, but you can Google Translate them. But in this recent book, 2 political analysts state the following. Few politicians earnestly believe that culture can be an economic investment that acts as a catalyst for growth. In most people's opinion, culture is nothing more than an expense, which we can choose to prioritize if we think that art and culture contribute something of significance to society. So in other words, arts and culture is dispensable to most people. Our director, Mikkel Bo at the National Gallery of Denmark, has commented on this development, saying in the national newspaper Politiken in the spring, caring for cultural heritage used to be a governmental political task, but is slowly eliminated from governmental obligations without politicians wavering. I'm concerned that what is missing are powerful arguments explaining why culture is a basic value supporting our society. And from a recent interview I did with the cultural rapporteur of the Social Democrats in Denmark, Mogens Jensen, he says, I think it's important to do more research into the effects of art and culture. How does it influence our education, our development of competencies, and our personal growth to have access to culture? I think people need to be told that culture has a utility value for their personal well-being and development, ultimately also for the economic bottom line of our society. So the big question for, I think everyone in this room, is how does digitized cultural heritage contribute to personal well-being, opportunities, and societal development? And how can we measure such things? The tools we usually utilize and have available, are they actually sufficient to try and capture such things as personal growth, feeling of connectedness in society, feeling of having a voice in culture, being able to participate? Can we track that with Google Analytics at all? So what it comes down to is to try and measure what is very, very difficult to try and grasp. With a quote from Robert McNamara, measure what is important, don't make important what you can measure. At Europeana, we come together in working groups and task forces to tackle shared challenges with shared solutions. And one of the task forces I've been involved with in recent years is the impact assessment task force. We've been working for a couple of years on developing a common toolbox for our sector to measure and assess the impact that digitizing cultural heritage can have on socio-cultural areas, on economy and innovation in society. And I'd just like to play a short video to introduce you to this tool. So this was just to give you a feeling of what the Impact Playbook tries to deliver. We have ended phase 1 of designing this playbook. So this nice publication that you see on the screen, and which you can download for free on impact.tools, is chapter 1, how to design an impact case study. What kinds of preparations to make. And right now we are preparing the 3 next chapters, you can say, of narration, data collection, and evaluation. So they will be published in the upcoming months. The Impact Playbook is designed almost like a cookbook. So with recipes of how to put together an impact assessment. And we've really made an effort to make it easy and approachable for people who are not necessarily trained in impact assessment, and borrowing all kinds of methods and approaches from other sectors to inform the cultural heritage sector in this emerging methodology. The whole design of the Impact Playbook is heavily and firmly grounded in academic research by Professor Simon Tanner at the King's College Digital Lab in London, who in 2012 published the Balanced Value Impact Model, which is a theoretical approach to impact assessment for the cultural heritage sector. And what we have done in the Impact Task Force is to turn that theory into a practical tool. So when we say impact, what do we really mean? The sort of official statement is changes that occur for stakeholders in society as a result of activities for which the organization is accountable. So this is a bit technical language, but the essence is that we can have high aspirations as museums of contributing to a more enlightened, cohesive, happy society, but there's an accountability line of what do we actually influence. And in the Impact Playbook, we try to work with the stuff that we can actually say that we have influence on. So maybe in our mission statements we say we contribute to a more enlightened society. But what we can measure is how we actually maybe influence the education system through our partnership programs. But the individual sort of citizens in society and their feeling of being enlightened will be a consequence of many different inputs, not only from us, but also from us. The Impact Playbook, as I said, is like a cookbook full of different tools that you can take and use. One of those tools to try and get an overview of the kind of impact you're aspiring to have is defining impact areas. So do you want to contribute to social cultural impact, economic impact, or innovation impact? There's a tool called Impact Lenses, where you focus on sort of the binoculars you're looking through when you're looking for your impact. Are you looking for improving utility for your users, or improving their sense of community, or improving their learning, for instance? Then we work a lot with tools that you probably know from other situations already, such as empathy maps, where we try to map and set ourselves in the shoes of our users and understand their barriers to participate, what they can gain from it, and so on. And finally, a tool I'd like to highlight is the change pathway, where you map your resources, your stakeholders, your activities, all the way through to the impact you'd like to achieve. And as you can see here, does this work? But you can see this accountability line. So what we can really hope to measure is the outcomes, what we can actually be accountable for, which contributes to a wider impact in society. So SMK Open, the project I started out by presenting, is a partner in developing the Europeana Playbook, both as a member of the task force and also by delivering case studies that will be available for everyone in the sector to use. Last year we kicked off our collaboration with a workshop held at the SMK with participants both from Europeana and the management of SMK Open and SMK in general, where we decided on the principal priorities and made some fundamental decisions how and what could we measure in this project. So using the impact area tool, we decided that what we wanted to focus on is the social cultural impact and not so much, for instance, economic and innovation impact. Not because it's not interesting, but because really trying to grasp this impact is, if you want to be methodologically concise, you really need to work through this process in detail. So this is what we started out with. Also, we started out using the impact lenses focusing on utility and community for the users. This led to the formulation of 2 impact statements for these 2 lenses. So for utility, the impact that we hope to have is that users feel empowered by access to our digitized collections, and they engage with them for learning, knowledge sharing, creativity, and pleasure. And when it comes to community building, users feel connected to art and to SMK, and they participate in an open dialogue about art and what it means to them. Furthermore, we also zoomed in on 2 primary target groups. And even though in our strategy we say that we want to be SMK for all, once it comes to impact assessment, you need to focus on some specific users that you hope to impact. Because if you want to see if you're impacting all, you won't get any valid results out of it. So the 2 primary target groups that we decided to focus on in SMK Open is school teachers, where educational use of SMK's art and knowledge in schools around the country can influence their sense of fulfillment in their work, hopefully. And the other target group is young creatives, because SMK Open is all about being a catalyst for users' creativity. So seeing the open collections of the museum as a toolbox for do-it-yourself creativity. So this was sort of the design of the case study, following this first chapter of the Impact Playbook that is already available. Now, as I said, SMK Open is really sort of a project behind the lines, tying together different databases. So in a way, we have been just working on getting the infrastructure right and not really being out there interacting with users, which is the whole point of SMK Open. But recently, we had the opportunity to do a first impact test with real users based on the work so far in SMK Open. And that opportunity was to work with ULK, the Young People's Art Labs, Unges Laboratorier for Kunst, who were going to be at the Young People's Meeting, which is a huge gathering of young people organized by youth organizations all over Denmark. 3 days of debates, interaction, dialogue, focused on democratic engagement for young people. So this happened just 1.5 weeks ago in Copenhagen, and this was our opportunity to meet this second target group that we defined and see how they responded to SMK Open. And the test bed was a specific workshop which we developed together with some partners I'll mention in a minute. A taboo workshop. The idea here was that a lot of young people are struggling with mental or physical vulnerability, such as suicidal thoughts, depressions, anxieties, what's it called, ludomania, struggling with being sort of addicted to gaming, or it can even be something as tough as being struck with cancer and at a young age, or someone in your family. And there are organizations reaching out to all of these young groups. And we got into a partnership with them to develop a workshop for the young people's meeting where we wanted to make the invisible visible. So all of these difficult emotions that young people carry around can be very difficult to put into words. And a lot of them feel lonely, and they carry these heavy emotions all by themselves with no one to really talk to, because it's too difficult to say out loud. And the response from people around them can also be very just difficult to cope with such tough life situations. So the idea of this taboo workshop was to use the open art of SMK as a stepping stone to break the taboos about mental and physical vulnerability, and to try to use this remixable creative resource to open up dialogue and understanding, and maybe even healing by means of artistic co-creation. So in preparing this workshop, we of course went through using the different tools in the Playbook, mapping the empathy, the empathetic place, position of our users, and mapping also a change pathway of the kinds of activities that we should put in place to try and achieve the impact we were hoping for. And we sat down with the Young People's Art Lab and representatives from the youth organizations, and tried to just test this workshop format and gaining experience of how did this work, and how could we tweak to improve the workshop. And then very recently we went to the Young People's Meeting, featuring over 30,000 participants aging 15 to 25, school kids, high school kids, university students, people from production schools, and so on. Really sort of a broad selection of young people from Denmark. And along with hundreds others, we had a stall where you could come and meet us and see what we were all about. And then also we ran this workshop out in a beautiful open field. Thankfully the sun was shining, and these are the partners that we teamed up with. As you can see, it's different youth centers that all work with these young people who have different things to struggle with. So partnering up with these organizations taught us as an art museum about how to approach these difficult topics with respect. And importantly, we let the Young People's Art Lab facilitate the actual workshop so that it was a young-to-young interaction. instead of sort of grown-up professionals being like teachers towards the young people in the workshop. We wanted very much to have a more sort of equal meeting between facilitators and workshop participants. More than 100 school kids came to the workshop, and the whole workshop started out where we played an audio track that we had co-produced with these youth organizations, where you could listen to testimonies of young people who have mental or physical vulnerabilities. And the idea here was to make sure that we didn't expose the young people who are struggling and diagnose them, but just let them talk about the difficult emotions that they have, which are in many ways shared by everyone who is young and going through puberty and so on. So again, to break that taboo that if you're sick with either mental or physical conditions, that you're sort of an outsider. But to try to just convey that these difficult emotions of feeling lonely, of feeling wrong, they can happen to everyone. And then the workshop was a very basic cut and paste where we had printed out artworks and we brought a lot of magazines too, and then just let the young people in small groups cut and glue and make collage. So it was very down to earth, nothing fancy digital, but of course using that resource that we allow everyone to cut in the original artworks. And then focus the workshop very much on the dialogue and the process and not so much on the product. It wasn't about making a pretty collage, it was about addressing and discussing these difficult emotions. Then following up on the whole preparation of the case study, we conducted a series of qualitative interviews where we had the assistance of an anthropologist who's a user experience expert in formulating the questions and coding the analysis afterwards. And the indications that we're seeing so far of the impact of this kind of exercise. So for instance, we asked, what do you think art can be used for? And one of the participants replied, it's easier for me to express my emotions through images or drawings because then I don't have to explain everything. And then other people can make their own sense of it and relate to it in their own way. Also, we asked, what does it mean when art is digitized and made freely available? One of the participants replied, it's strange in a way because those old artworks have always felt like they were sacred almost. But I think it's a good idea that everyone is allowed to see the artworks even if they don't feel like or have time to visit the museum. Another said, it's like art changes character when you can touch it with your own hands. You're able to look at it up close. It means a lot to be able to hold the art between your hands and touch it. And finally, one other person said it's awesome that we can use these artworks that were once created and preserved and make something new out of them, make them our own, so to speak. That way you can bring something old with you into something new. Also, from these qualitative interviews we made, we're seeing some challenges in achieving this ambition of being a catalyst for users' creativity. So one of the challenges we ran into is when we asked, do you talk with friends or family about art and being creative? And we definitely saw that this is not really the case. We're not that creative at home. It's not at all something that comes up in the conversations we have. So quite a gap for young people between their daily life and being creative and thinking of digitized collections as something for them. Also, an important indication is one participant saying, we don't really have creative classes at school anymore. That was more of a thing when we were in primary and middle school. Now it's all about books and computers. So I think this is a tendency probably in school systems all over Europe, with the competitiveness of PISA surveys and so on. The creative subjects tend to evaporate, and more focus is on the STEM subjects, because we feel there's more of a career opportunity and economic impact in going that way. But maybe we're losing something important here. So to sum up, the preliminary outcomes, and this is very raw, very recent data, so it's just sort of the feeling we have so far, is that free access to digital cultural heritage seems to evoke confidence to express oneself, to increase understanding of the nuances and possibilities of visual language. It seems to make cultural heritage feel more accessible and create a sense of ownership to cultural heritage, which I really believe is a very important first step to build a relationship with a new young user. And some of the challenges that we need to tackle is communicate how art and creativity can play a role in young people's lives, but in people's lives in general. Reach out and engage young people and their families in artistic creative experiences and activities in our museums and outside our museums. And also I think we have an important task which goes back to the quotes I had from my research talking to politicians, to influence schools and politicians to prioritize creative subjects in the education system. I think there's really a missing link here, but it seems that the political layer is also understanding that this is important. So, the actual case study will be published next month on the Europeana Impact site, along with a range of other impact studies that are being conducted right now by colleagues all over Europe. So this is a really great resource for you all to consult. And with that, I'd like to say kiitos.